Today on episode number 494 of the School of Podcasting's Morning Announcements, we do our yearly deep dive into listener loyalty by having you answer the question, what is your favorite podcast and why? Hit it, ladies!
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005, I am your personal podcast coach, Dave Jackson. Thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, we talk about all things podcasting. I help you massage your message. I help you tackle the technology. I help you face your fears and flatten that learning curve and get you on the road to pain-free podcasting. Our website is schoolofpodcasting.com, and you can use the coupon code LISTENER, that is LISTENER, when you sign up at theschoolofpodcasting.com. Every year, I ask you, what is your favorite podcast in this year? You guys had me nervous there for a little bit, but you came through with a bunch of really great replies. And as we just have a few days left in December, I want to remind you, if you're going to PodFest in Florida in February, that's podfest.us, use the coupon code EARLYBIRD, and that'll save you $100 off that. I'll be speaking at that in February, so hope to see you there. And as we get into these, there's no particular order except for one. The very first person that submits their My Favorite Podcast is the first one we play. And this year that goes to Max Flight.
This is Max Flight from airplanegeeks.com, TheUAVDigest.com, and PaxXPodcast.com. All three are aviation-related podcasts that explore the various aspects of aviation, unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, and the airline passenger experience. My favorite podcast of the moment is a technology and society podcast called Exponent. It's hosted by Ben Thompson and James Allworth, two brilliant guys who tease out the nuances of tech strategy that escape us lesser minds. I like Exponent because of the dynamics between the two hosts, the brilliance of the content, and its relevance to things I like to think about. I'm also intrigued by the style that's in opposition to many things I strive for in my own podcasts. There is no intro or outro music. The show just starts and later stops. The hosts sometimes have trouble getting a coherent sentence started. It's a quality I've observed among some exceptionally intelligent people. Their brain works faster than their mouth, and they think out loud. In any other podcast, this would drive me nuts. At Exponent, it's part of the immersive experience. You can find them at exponent.fm.
Thank you, Max. Next up, we have Chris Lewis.
Hi, this is Chris Lewis from the Dad Spotlight podcast at dadspotlight.com, where we shine a light on great people, brands, and products to help dads be the best dads that they can be. I was so excited to be able to share my favorite podcast with all of you today. My favorite podcast right now, I've got a lot, but the one that I consistently go back to recently has been a new one called the Up in Your Business podcast. It is a brand new podcast by Angus Nelson, and it is found at angusnelson.com. And Angus has created a podcast that really brings in not only inspiration to help you to create a business that you are proud of, but also brings in his personal experience, his personal successes, his failures, shares that, brings on great guests to help you to be able to learn from them as well. And I've consistently loved the honesty, the openness, and the practical wisdom that he shares. That is one of them. But there are so many others, including yours, Dave, that I love listening to on a daily basis. And I'm just happy to be able to share that with you today.
Thank you, Chris. Next up, one of my favorite people, Craig from Inglés Podcast.
Hi, it's Craig here from Inglés Podcast, which can be found at inglespodcast.com. My podcast is a podcast which helps Spanish speakers improve their English. And my favorite podcast is The School of Podcasting. A lot of people are probably saying this. However, thought long and hard about it, and here are my reasons. So Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting, I looked in my podcatcher, and I counted about 45 podcasts that I listen to on a fairly regular basis. SOP, the School of Podcasting, is the only one that I actually have a regular listening schedule for. Every Monday morning, I take my wife to work in the car.
And I'm just going to jump in here real quick and say hello to Andy. Thanks so much for listening.
On the way back, I tune into the School of Podcasting. And that's my time. That Monday morning when I come back from taking her into work is my special time. It's the only podcast that has a special slot or place in the week. And it's the only podcast I actually wait for it to come out. So I might have 7 or 8 podcasts backed up of other podcasts. And depending on what mood I'm in, or maybe if I'm in the gym or where I am, maybe I'll give them a listen and listen to one after the other. But that never happens to the School of Podcasting. It's always listened to on the day that it's released. Also, the School of Podcasting fills 2 requirements for me that I think are really important. It educates me and it entertains me at the same time. I don't think I learn as much from the podcast as I used to, but I do forget things, and Dave reminds me about best practices in podcasting that maybe I'd forgotten. And also there's a news section that keeps me up to date with different apps and services that could be useful to me as a podcaster. So it's very, very rare that I don't learn something from an episode. I never find the School of Podcasting boring. I think that's got a lot to do with Dave's presentation style, and also the fact that the content is mixed in with sound effects, audio clips, interviews, silly voices. You kind of never know what you're going to get from week to week. Dave is a risk taker, and that experimentation aspect always makes me eager with anticipation to see what Dave's going to do next week. Some episodes are obviously more interesting and engaging than others. Some are pure gold and have me laughing out loud. Dave also involves listeners via audio feedback, so there's a strong feeling of community in the podcast. Dave's also never afraid to speak his mind, so there's sometimes a bit of controversy thrown in there, which also makes it very interesting to me. And Dave's a sharer. He shares, he gives of himself. So I feel like I know him pretty well. And I kind of consider Dave a friend, which, if you think about it, is a pretty powerful achievement for a podcast. When you take into account I only really met Dave briefly once in person for about 5 minutes, but through Dave's podcast, I really feel like he's a friend.
Wow. Okay, Craig, thank you very, very much. That's deeply touching. And it's a twin spin. Next up, Ken Blanchard from Black Man with a Gun.
Hey, Dave, this is Ken Blanchard from the Black Man with a Gun show podcast at blackmanwithagun.com. My favorite podcast just happens to be the School of Podcasting. I've been a listener and a fan since 2007 when I first started my own podcast. I've learned just about everything that I know about podcasting through you, or indirectly through all your great friends and contacts. You have the best friends in podcasting. I would never have been at Blog World or at New Media Expo or known about anybody else as fast and as intimate as I do by listening to you. We've been on a nice journey together. I feel like you're my neighbor. I know more about you than I do about my neighbors. I've cried with you. I've cheered with you. I've learned a lot. I consider myself a successful podcaster because of the School of Podcasting. I know neither one of us are rolling in the dough, but our life is not boring. That is for sure. Again, this is Ken Blanchard, and my favorite podcast just happens to be the School of Podcasting for the journey itself, for the contacts, for the education, for the camaraderie, for being like-minded. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Mr. Ken Blanchard, my brother from another mother. Shalom, baby. Love that guy. And not because he just said my show was his favorite, but and if you're new to the show, you're like, who is this egomaniac that just plays people telling him how great it is? That's not normally the case. But I do deeply appreciate it. It's hard to make Dave speechless, but you guys are coming close. One more, and then the rest are all about other people, okay? Just bear with me.
Hello, Dave Jackson. My name is Dan Lovallo, radio broadcaster, and also the host of 3 podcasts from Northwest Connecticut: The Dan Report, Baseball on the Fly, and Headline History. Headline History I just launched. It examines the reporting of historical events and their immediate aftermath, such as how the media covered President Kennedy's assassination. My favorite podcast is Ask the Podcast Coach with you and Jim Collison at AskThePodcastCoach.com. I usually listen to the program on demand because my Saturdays are busy, but I look forward to hearing the excellent banter between you and Jim, and also hearing from the callers, especially Miss Eileen when she phones the show. I can't begin to list what I've learned from the program, but I will name a few, from the software one can use to themes, what happens at the various podcast conventions, and I hope to attend one of those conventions someday. Other podcasts you talk about, and as I said, the callers, and the byplay between you and Jim. You and Jim both connect with your audience. I don't miss a show. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Dan. You have phenomenal pipes. Man, was that awesome? Thank you so much. And Ask the Podcast Coach is always a ton of fun.
Hey, Dave, it's Erik K Johnson from Podcast Talent Coach. Thanks for having me on the show again this year for your year-end wrap-up. You can find me online at podcasttalentcoach.com. The Podcast Talent Coach podcast is where I help podcasters turn their information into entertainment so they can turn their podcast into powerful, profitable relationships. You can find me online anytime you'd like at podcasttalentcoach.com. Before I get to my favorite podcast of this year, Dave, I just want to thank you for all the help and support you've given me over the years, helping me launch my podcast, and just being a true friend and sounding board there as I've been growing my business. And I love brainstorming with you. We always come from a different angle and come up with some great ideas. I'm honored to call you a friend, Dave, and I love the show. I don't miss an episode of it. Thanks for including me in your fine little circle there. As I was thinking about my favorite podcast for this year, I had a tough time coming up with one. I try and change it up every year, and I try and find new podcasts to turn you on to. Most of the podcasts I listen to are either about podcasting or about online business, because that's what I really enjoy. But this year I wanted to pick something a little different. So the podcast I'm going to select for this year for my favorite podcast is called the We Choose Respect podcast with Jedley. You can find him over at WeChooseRespect.com. Jedley is a magician. He tours around the country putting on magic shows, typically at schools, where he teaches kids to be respectful through the magic show, which is really pretty cool. On his podcast, though, he helps parents just learn how to become better parents, tries to arm them with some tools they can use to help parents raise respectful kids. It's a pretty cool show, and you can find him over at WeChooseRespect.com, especially if you have kids. It's a great place to stop by. Dave, thanks for having me on again this year. Again, Erik K Johnson, Podcast Talent Coach. Find me over at podcasttalentcoach.com, and here's to a great 2016.
Erik, my buddy, so glad to have you as a friend as well. Find him at podcasttalentcoach.com. Find Erik and myself at podcastreviewshow.com. It's a great place if you want to get your show reviewed.
Hi, this is Emily from the Classy Little Podcast, which you can find at classylittlepodcast.com. My co-host James and I record a weekly show where we discuss the history, fun facts, and trivia of a different topic each week while enjoying wine and cheese. I can speak for both of us when I say our favorite podcast is You Must Remember This, hosted by Karina Longworth. It can be found at youmustrememberthispodcast.com. And this podcast was really the jumping off point to get my co-host and I to decide we wanted to do a podcast. Karina Longworth is a writer and film historian who has authored books about Al Pacino, George Lucas, and Meryl Streep. If you've listened to our podcast, you know my co-host James loves anything having to do with Meryl Streep. You Must Remember This is a storytelling podcast that focuses on the golden age of Hollywood in the 20th century. The attention to detail Karina has seems so effortless, but every episode is so carefully crafted and you can't help but get sucked in. In fact, I'm jealous of anyone just discovering this podcast because they get to binge listen while I have to wait a week to hear a new episode. In the last season of the podcast, Karina did an entire series focusing on the Hollywood surrounding Charles Manson, and every episode was a slow and carefully constructed build-up to the inevitable murders everyone associates with Manson and his family. But the 12-episode series ended up being so much more. From the massive influence of the Beatles to the generosity of Dennis Wilson to the tumultuous relationship of Roman Polanski and his wife, Sharon Tate. It was, for lack of a better analogy, the serial of 1969 Hollywood. The current season focuses on MGM stories, and she's had amazing guest stars to portray the voices of old Hollywood names like Adam Goldberg as David O. Selznick, Craig Mazin as Louis B. Mayer, and Dana Carvey as Mickey Rooney. As much as other podcasts have impacted my life, this was the podcast that made me want to be a podcaster. This was the podcast that made me realize that podcasting could offer so much more than other media like television and movies. One of our podcast contributors and my best friend, Kitty, told me that she gets absorbed in this podcast because it's not like someone is showing her what happened. The storytelling is so good, she's watching it in her own mind, and that's even more impactful than any other medium. Whenever someone asks for a podcast recommendation, I always point them toward You Must Remember This. If any show will get someone hooked on podcasts, it would be this one. Check them out. And if you're looking for something to fill the time in between episodes of You Must Remember This, you can feel free to check us out at classylittlepodcast.com. Cheers.
Cheers, Emily. Thank you so much. And I always appreciate the fact she's out at the chat room and Ask the Podcast Coach. Hey, everything we're talking about today, you can find all the links to this are at schoolofpodcasting.com/494.
This is Francis McGrogan Wicks. I'm in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. My own podcast is at standcurious.com. This year, my recommended podcast, it's Canada Land with Jesse Brown. It's at canadalandshow.com. If you are Canadian, you must listen to it. If you live anywhere near the Canadian-U.S. border, you must listen to it. It's a little like the Daily Show's Jon Stewart, except, of course, he's not funny. I don't think he's trying to be. He's quite serious and intense and even a little unlikable. But the news and the guests are so good, so interesting, and so compelling. I find that afterwards, much like the Daily Show, you feel like you know what's going on in the world. Whether you actually do or not is another thing. It has a strange little jingle, which is actually quite fascinating and compelling, and I find myself humming it a lot. The stories are a deep dive into the media world in Canada of conflicting personalities, opinions, elitism, money, power, politics, all these drives and motivations. The commentary seems very well researched, and they have actually broken major stories. It has that kind of behind-the-scenes, non-establishment type vibe that makes you feel like you're getting the nitty-gritty, hiding in plain sight, congressional dish type of information. And I find the website and the newsletter are incredibly great supporting resources as well if people are interested in going and reading a bit further. The audio and production quality is excellent, of course. It's not that overproduced stuff like the NPR, Serial, CBC podcasts. I don't like that kind of thing. But to catch a newbie podcast listener in Canada, it's 30 or 40 minutes of really interesting information. Canadian, it's entertaining, it's fast-paced, it's informative. You don't have to agree with all the perspectives, but it is a thoughtful dialogue. And I find nearly every time I listen to it, I think, oh, I know the perfect person who must listen to this. They would love it.
Thank you, Francis. I deeply appreciate the in-depth discussion of why you love that show. I did hear the word deep dive in there, and you guys have no idea how hard it is for me to not jump into the middle of these. Otherwise, the show would be about 5 hours long.
Hey, this is Gretchen from Charlotte. I'm the author of Always Lessons, Empowering Educators podcast. It's a weekly podcast released every Monday for educators of all experience levels, including newbies, teachers in transition or distress, and classroom leaders. I focus on encouragement and inspiration as well as providing classroom best practices. But my favorite podcast, and I couldn't narrow it down to one, so I have two.
I'm sorry, Gretchen, you've been disqualified. Moving on. I'm just kidding. Here's Gretchen.
First one is The Mentee by Jeff Woods. He talks about surrounding yourself with heavy-hitting mentors. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And for me, that's really impactful to find those who are where I want to be in the field of education, build those connections, network, and learn as much as I can from them. My second favorite podcast is by Ryan Hawk called The Learning Leader. He focuses on leadership in every field, providing simple truths for effective and engaging leadership styles. And for me in my journey as an educator, I want to make sure I'm leading people in the best, most inspiring way. So these are the 2 that really stand out for me. I highly suggest you tune in and listen each week. Hope everyone has a great one. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gretchen. Again, everything's at schoolofpodcasting.com/494.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Harry.
This is Harry Duran, host of Podcast Junkies, which can be found at podcastjunkies.com. Podcast Junkies is also known as the podcaster's voice, and it's a place where you can hear engaging conversations with some of your favorite podcast hosts. One of my favorite podcasts is the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, which can be found at duncantrussell.com. That's DUNCANTRUSSELL.com. Now, with so many podcasts to choose from, I always like to take a break and have a good laugh every once in a while. And Duncan is a really engaging host who covers a wide variety of topics, some of them not safe for work, so make sure the kids are tucked away at bed when you listen. But he always makes me laugh. He's a genuine and sincere host, and I'm looking forward to the time when I can have him on Podcast Junkies as well, which would be amazing. So Duncan Trussell Family Hour for something a little bit different.
Thank you so much, Harry. I'm so glad we don't have podcasting superlatives, because Harry would win like best hair every single year.
Hey, Dave Jackson. This is Jeff Bradburry from the TeacherCast.net network, home of TeacherCast.net, the podcast. My show is all about education and educators helping you find the right technology for your classrooms. My favorite podcast is Mat Men, because I am not only just a big wrestling fan, but I really love the stuff that's happening over on the GFQ network. And I want to give a big shout out to our buddies Andrew Zarian and all the other guys over on GFQ. So thanks for your time. Hope everyone's having a great holiday season, and I'll talk to you soon, Dave.
Thank you, Jeff. Hope the triplets are doing good. Yeah, you will hear more about the guys from Queens Network later in the show.
Hi, this is Jeremy Denise from the Transmissions Podcast. We're at transmissionspodcast.com. And we're a podcast about the Transformers franchise. And we talk about the toys, comics, TV shows, and movies, all starring our favorite robots that turn into cars and planes and toasters and stuff. My favorite podcast is The Morning Stream at frogpants.com/TMS. And The Morning Stream is hosted by Scott Johnson and Brian Ibbett. And I love it because it's got a great mix of humor, news, music, pop culture. And you can really tell that the hosts love doing the show. I also really enjoy the rotation of regular guests such as Tom Merritt, Veronica Belmont, and Justin Robert Young. The show really fills a morning show hole in my life that I didn't even know I had.
What a great, check that out. Filled a hole I didn't even know I had. And if you're like, who's Brian Ibbett? I think it was a Nudity Expo where he was the hat guy. Or was that Podcast Movement? But that's who Brian Ibbett is. Coverville as well. Great guy, great host, Morning Stream.
Hi, my name is Jessica Bailey, and I have a podcast called Funky Fitness Now. And my co-host, who I have never met, lives in Maine. Our show is about all the wild and wacky things people do to try to get fit or stay fit. My favorite podcast is The Bowery Boys, and it's about New York City history. And basically why I love it so much is it feels like they're awesome bartenders at a bar, and they're telling me all the weird and interesting facts about the city that I live in and the city that I plan to stay in for the rest of my life, and things that I wouldn't know without listening to their podcast. And I think that they're very fun, and I love their dynamic. The website for this podcast is BoweryBoysHistory.com.
Thank you, Jessica. I know I'll definitely be going over to funkyfitness.com to check out your show. You have me intrigued.
Hi, Dave. John Overall here from the WP Plugins A to Z podcast, which can be found over at WP Plugins A to Z.com, or should I say A to Z. Podcast is recorded in the great west coast of North America between Victoria, BC, and California with my co-host Marcus Couch. The show all about WordPress plugins, saving yourself time and money, finding the best plugins for your website. And this is my favorite podcast. My favorite podcast came to me a couple, 3 months ago. It's called the Art of Manliness podcast, which can be found over at artofmanliness.com. And why it's my favorite show? Well, been doing some manly growth in the last couple of years, and discovering this podcast was a great thing. There seems to be a significant lack in man advice in the world today, advice for men. This show has some fantastic advice as well as some really fascinating interviews with some really incredible guests. I recommend to your listeners they go check out the Art of Manliness podcast. Fantastic show. That's all I've got for you now, Dave. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. If you have problems with WordPress, John is the guy you want to call. Find him over at johnoverall.com. Love WordPress plugins A to Z. And for me, manly advice, I just listened to an episode. They just said, it goes like this. I'm sorry. You're right. It's my fault. I know. I'm sorry. You're right. It's my fault. It was just like episode after that. It was like, well, that is good advice.
Hey, Dave, this is John Wilkerson from The Wired Homeschool over at thewiredhomeschool.com. And I have to say that right now, my favorite podcast is Finding Christ in Cinema. The guys over there at the GCT network, they are really doing a great job with this podcast. Michael and Brendan, they review movies. After they've been out for a while, they probably, they get them streaming or they get them on DVD or whatever. And they really take the time to go through the movies and tease out the bits so that if you're sitting down with your friends watching a movie and maybe they don't know Christ like you know him, you can say, hey, you know what? This here reminds me of who Christ is. And they do a really great job of that every single week over there. And what I like about it is they get right to the point with the reviews. They talk about the art of filmmaking and whether or not it was done well and whether the acting was done well. And then they also try to find those themes in there that you can point people to Christ with. So Finding Christ in Cinema, you can find it at findingchristincinema.com. And I think it's a great, great podcast. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, John. And you might remember John. He was on the show. He's the guy that's podcasting with like 8 million children in a house. Actually, I think it was only 7 million. But this is one of the things I like about this show is I'm learning about a bunch of shows that I want to go check out because I'm like, I want to hear that. And it's a different take than your typical thing. I'm also not hearing a lot of Serial and Mark Maron. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but as much as we think we're all listening to this, I haven't heard Serial as my favorite podcast. It's interesting.
This is John Livesay. The podcast is The Successful Pitch in Los Angeles. The Successful Pitch podcast interviews investors who share their criteria on which startup to fund and successful entrepreneurs who've already gotten funded and how they did it. And I'd like to recommend the Grit and Hustle podcast by Todd Herman. I love Todd Herman's Grit and Hustle podcast because it is full of interviews with startups who've had to overcome all kinds of obstacles and dig deep to get the grit and hustle to prove why their podcast is successful.
It's so good, Sparky even liked it. Thank you, John.
I'm John Tsarpalas, host of the Commonwealthy podcast at commonwealthy.com. Commonwealthy trains those who understands the benefits of limited government on how to run a campaign and win elections. Every week, we have another step in the campaign process. That might be why I love this new podcast, the Ferderalist Radio Hour. Launched in April of this year, host Ben Domenech is fascinating to me. I think the man is absolutely brilliant. They talk politics, they talk policy, they talk economics, media, and a whole lot about younger generations. I'm a baby boomer, and most of the guests on this show are in their 30s and 40s and are extremely articulate, interesting, thoughtful, well-written, and well-spoken. Not every show's politics. About once a week, there's a whole sports segment. And from time to time, there's a whole lot of looking at media and pop culture and what's happening with millennials and Generation X and Generation Y. I just find this show fascinating. It gives good, solid, reasoned answers, ideas, and thoughts on how to solve our political problems. It's 50 minutes long, no commercials. I guess the 10 minutes from the radio hours where the commercials usually go. And by the way, I love the bumper music. They've got a huge variety of music, which I find just amazing, and it gets me pumped up every day. So I highly, highly recommend check out the Federalist Radio Hour. I think if you have any interest in politics at all, no matter where you are on that political spectrum, the Federalists offer some really great ideas on how to get things done and how to help the world. Take care, Dave.
Thank you, John. If you are running for local office, definitely go check out John at commonwealthy.com. He can definitely help you get elected.
Hi, Dave. This is Judy Graph. I was going to give you my favorite podcast. I produce my husband's podcast, Farm and Ranch Country, at farmandranchcountry.com. He's a farmer from the Midwest that talks about world events and how they influence production agriculture. But my favorite podcast is Dan Miller's 48 Days to the Work You Love. It's at 48days.com. The reason I like it so much is because he shows tough love to his listeners and doesn't sugarcoat things for them. He makes them take responsibility, and he doesn't just tell them what they want to hear and go on. But he has experience to back up his advice, and ultimately he believes in people and gives them hope, and which is kind of rare, I think, when I'm listening to podcasts. He's like a wise, loving grandfather that wants people to succeed. So that's why when his podcast comes up, it's always the first one I want to listen to right away. Thanks, Dave, for everything you do.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, Dan Miller, number one, nicest guy on the planet. I got to meet him at New Media Expo a couple years ago. And he's a classic example of you don't need a big radio voice to be a podcaster. Dan Miller's kind of like your loving, gentle grandpa on the back porch giving you advice. It's a great show, 48days.net.
Ken Kastler. My favorite podcast this year is one called Snap Judgement, and it's currently out of New York. It used to be out of the Bay Area, and it's great stories, music behind it, a bit of history, off-the-wall stuff, everything very interesting. My podcast, Thinking Outside of the Box, is currently on hiatus. Productions at bountifulproductions.com is going to be coming out with a new podcast, Daily Doses of Optimism, which will be 3 to 5 minute links to positive news.
Thank you, Ken, so much. I love it. Ken was doing one show. I was like, you know what? I'm kind of bored with this one now. Might bring it back later, but I'm going to try this new positive thing. So, Ken, best of luck with everything you're doing. Again, these are out at schoolofpodcasting.com/494.
Hi, Dave. This is Kim from On the Table, Topics for Toastmasters podcast, which can be found at onthetablepodcasts.com. I wanted to tell you my favorite podcast. I've got a lot of my old favorites that I still like to listen to on a regular basis, but this year I have never skipped an episode of Michael Port's Steal the Show podcast. Michael had the most unorthodox marketing program. If you bought his book when it first came out, he was giving away everything. Lots of paid content for free. I hope it worked out for him. Thanks, Dave. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kim. Find her at onthetablepodcast.com. And Kim, thank you so much for the whiteboard. Kim is a member of the Cleveland Podcasters Meetup. You can find that at clevelandpodcasters.com. And she heard me say on Ask the Podcast Coach that all I needed was a whiteboard. And the next thing I know, there it was. How cool is that? Thanks so much, Kim.
Hi, my name is Laura McClellan, and I'm the host of The Productive Woman, which you can find at theproductivewoman.com. The Productive Woman is a podcast about productivity for busy women, but men are welcome too. Choosing one favorite podcast was a real challenge for me because there are a number of them that I never miss an episode of. So it was kind of like trying to pick which of my 5 kids is my favorite. To simplify things, I decided to exclude the other productivity podcasts that I love and the podcasts about podcasting that I listen to regularly. My very favorite podcast is Mac Power Users, which is hosted by Katie Floyd and David Sparks. You can find it at macpowerusers.com. Why is it my favorite? Well, there are several reasons. The subject matter, of course. I am a tech geek and an admitted Apple fangirl, so I love their discussions of how to make better use of the Apple gear I own through their really good deep dives into the hardware and the software that makes it all work. I always learn something from every episode, and frankly, I usually spend some money based on their episodes because their recommendations have never steered me wrong. They have some really interesting guests that contribute to the conversations about tech and tools and systems and approaches that help make my life better. So that's a big part of why it's a favorite show. It's very practical. But just as important to me is the hosts themselves. What first caught my attention and got me listening for the first time was the fact that David and Katie are lawyers, as I am. They are very smart and very articulate and very funny, and that's what kept me listening. The interaction between the two of them adds a personal and an often very entertaining element to the nerdy tech conversation. Their differing perspectives about many of the tools they discuss, as well as sort of side issues like the debate between which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek, those things bring a balanced approach that personally I find really helpful. All that means I never miss an episode of Mac Power Users, and usually when they release a new episode, it immediately jumps to the top of my listening queue. So thanks, Dave, for giving me the opportunity to share this.
Thank you, Laura. Deeply appreciate that. Next up, we have somebody talking about the Mad at Dad podcast.
Or check 1 2, Dave Jackson 2015, School of Podcasting. This is Chiaki Hinohara of the Metal Woman Podcast and Hinohara Chiaki of the Japanese Metalhead Show. www.metalwoman.com is where I live. This is the only place on the web where you can experience metal in both English and in Japanese with a twist. Beer of the moment, food of the moment, etc., in the style of David Lee Roth. Mad at Dad is a podcast that I would like to talk about today. The number one Ichiban show of 2015, in my opinion. www.madatdadpodcast.com. So Mad at Dad, what is this thing about? So two podcasters that started it all, okay? Dave Slusher of the Evil Genius Chronicles and Michael Butler of the Rock and Roll Geek Show. Two dudes talking about their lives, talking about how people in their family are just pissed off at them, right? The beauty of this program, all right, so why is that so like, why do you want to listen to two dudes talking about their family, how people are pissed off at them, right? Dave Slusher, all right, he brings us way back. He probably has the longest running show, okay, not including the shows that like Podfaces, but his show, Evil Genius Chronicles, is still going on a continuous basis from day one. When was day one? Day one was probably when Adam Curry started audio blogging. And right after Dave Slusher began a couple weeks later, Michael Butler of the Rock and Roll Geek Show, he was like, well, let me just do this and let me start a music show. So Michael Butler's Rock and Roll Geek Show is the longest running music podcast in the friggin' world. So you have two of these pioneers, right? You have two podcasting pioneers. That started it all. I'm doing it wrong. So two podcasting pioneers, the guys who started it all, in your face, Mark Maron. All right, this is Mad at Dad. Listen to how professional the show is sounding. That's what Michael Butler says. Hey, Mark Maron, this is real friggin' podcasting. This is Mad at Dad podcast. We talk about music, beer, our lives, and why everybody is mad at us. So that's what this show is all about. It's like, why listen to podcasting if you want to listen to something that is overproduced? Like, these two guys will bring you back like grassroots style, right? This is why podcasting is so freaking beautiful and fantastic. The beauty of podcasting. And they both are great storytellers, okay? They record this show on Blab every Monday night. So check your local listings. Just remember, MAD, Mad at Dad. Subscribe, and you will get your weekly dose of something that you're probably like, I don't know. If you are married and if you have kids, you probably go through the same thing. So you'll probably just totally fit in. You could go on their chat and whatever, and they will tell you how screwed up your life is, etc., etc. At the same time, if you are not a father yet, you may reconsider becoming a father or being even married, having a family with all these problems. I don't know. All right, so kanpai, chinchin chai, otsukai-chan. Ippai. We'll do it again next year. Dave Jackson, cheers. Outs.
Thank you, my friend. Love that presentation. And yeah, this is one of those where you tune in because you kind of go, oh, wow, I'm not the only one that's got his whole family mad at him. I have my people, like-minded people.
Hey, Dave. It's Michel Nelson. Listen, I want to thank you for the School of Podcasting. I have recently discovered you and have learned a ton in just a few weeks. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to be launching a new podcast no later than the first week of January 2016. That podcast is called Build Your House Yourself University, by HiU for short. And it's what you would call, Dave, a journey podcast, because I'm going to be learning along with my audience about planning, designing, and managing the construction of my dream home. It's a podcast for lay people who want to be actively involved in the construction of their homes. And it's especially for people who have little or no experience with construction. What are my favorite podcasts? I know you asked for one. I just want to give you two because I like them both for practically the same reasons. One is called $100 MBA. It could be found at 100mba.net. And the second one is called Art of Likability, and it's found at artoflikability.com. I like them both because they're both educational podcasts that are also entertaining. I call it a perfect balance of sophistication and swagger, the perfect combination of book smarts and street smarts. And it's just really easy to listen to and fun to listen to. The production of both podcasts is superb. There is not a lot of dead space and the audio is perfect. I just really enjoy listening to them. Most of all, I like them both because they're quick and dirty. They kind of get to the point. There's not a lot of fluff. They tell me what I need to know, and then they move on. And for someone like me who's busy, that is a great characteristic. So those are my favorite podcasts, $100 MBA and Art of Likability. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Michelle. So glad that you're finding the show of value. I deeply appreciate you listening.
Hey, Dave Jackson. It's your friend Steve Stewart, host of a number of podcasts and the editor of Pottertainment Magazine. I'm calling in with my favorite podcast from 2015. Sorry to sound like a broken record. You know, does anybody really know what a broken record means anymore? I'm not talking about breaking the all-time hot dog eating contest. But anyway, my favorite podcast is still the Stacking Benjamins Show, which you can find surprisingly over at stackingbenjamins.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and all the other places. But this is a show about finance in general. They go over news topics. They have top-level discussions about financial topics, big and small. They have interviews, and not just interviews from people in the finance industry, but people with interesting stories. And the host, Joe Salciha, he brings the discussion back to finances in some way. It's really at the core a variety show with a lot of stuff going on. Money is always the basis of the topics, but if anything, everybody should go listen to the back and forth banter between Joe and his co-host, who actually is a practicing certified financial planner, although he's got to wear a bag over his head and remain anonymous to avoid having to put everything that he says through the compliance department. That's a completely side topic. We're not going to go there. My favorite podcast 3 years in a row is still the Stacking Benjamins Show, which you can find over at stackingbenjamins.com. Dave, thanks for this opportunity to share my favorite podcast. This is Steve Stewart, host of a number of podcasts, including my newest, oldish podcast, which is really a rebrand of Money Plan SOS. And the show is called No Debt, No Credit, No Problems. And of course, you can find that on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit my website where everything that I do can be found over at stevestewart.me. That's stevestewart.me because the guy who owns .com, he's owned it since before I had my first computer. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity, Dave. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Steve. The one and only Steve Stewart. Find him again, stevestewart.me.
Hi, this is Maya Good with Literary Roadhouse. On our show, me and 3 other co-hosts from various countries sit down every week and talk about one short story. My favorite podcast is Writing Excuses. You can find that show at writingexcuses.com. It is my favorite podcast because of all the shows about writing. This is the show that really gets deep into the craft. And it's one of the few shows that I can honestly say has made me a much better writer. I listen to it religiously. Every time a new episode comes into my feed, I run over and listen to it right away. You can find their archives on their website, and their archives are amazing, full of amazing episodes. The people that run the podcast are writers, professional writers, and they really get into the craft of writing fiction. I highly recommend that podcast for anyone that likes to write short stories or wants to be a novelist or just likes to write for fun. You'll learn a lot, and they are a blast to listen to.
Thank you, Maya. Met her on a Podcasters Roundtable. Find that at podcastersroundtable.com. And there's that phrase again about doing a deep dive.
Hello, Dave Jackson. It's Steve Stearns from Outside Health and Fitness. My show is all about finding new, fun ways to stay active, healthy, and fit outdoors. And you can find the show at outsidehealthandfitness.com. Now, my favorite podcast is a podcast that I learned about listening to your show. That's Podcast Talent Coach with Erik K Johnson. I'm a new listener, but I've gone back through a lot of Erik's episodes and found some amazing information that has really helped me improve my show.
Okay, I have to do a Dave Jackson and jump in here. This is why I say when people find your show, they go, oh my gosh, they will go and download your back catalog. So thank you, Steve, for helping to prove my point. Back to Steve.
It's given me some more ideas for coming up with content and even inspired me to try some different things in the show. You know, I really love Erik's approach. He gets right to the point in every episode, but he also keeps it entertaining. He's telling stories and analogies, and he really makes good use of your time. It's a different side of podcasting, and now when I meet new people that are getting into podcasting for the first time, I say there's 2 shows you got to listen to. You got to listen to School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson, and you got to listen to Podcast Talent Coach with Erik K Johnson. I think you guys are a great 1-2 punch. You can find Erik's show and some really cool podcast-related worksheets at podcasttalentcoach.com. Hey, Dave, thanks a lot for doing this. I love your show and actually all of your shows, and I look forward to more of them in 2016.
Thank you so much, Steve, and I would second that. Definitely check out podcasttalentcoach.com. Get the worksheets. If you like this show, it's because underneath I've had the pleasure of working with Erik on the podcast review show, and some of that knowledge rubs off and has helped my show.
Hello, Dave. Rich Warfield here from the Loud Pipes podcast, and we can be found at loudpipes.net. I do this show with a co-host, and we discuss topics relating to motorcycles, motorcycle experience, and we often mix in other automotive topics we're interested in. And you've asked to submit our favorite podcast to you, and I must say that has proven to be quite a challenge. And for me, it turned out to be Security Now, which can be found at twit.tv/SN. So this show is hosted by Steve Gibson over on Leo Laporte's Twit network, and I've been a listener and a watcher for about 6 years on this particular podcast. And it really provides value to me in a couple different ways. First off, I'm an IT security professional, so the information that comes out is very timely and relevant to my day job. And on a personal level, they cover all sorts of personal and privacy protection topics as it relates to your life online. And throughout the years, Steve and Leo actually have gotten into various topics of just other things they're interested in. Like Steve went over one time how he makes a great cup of coffee. You know, what type of beans he uses, what type of grinder he uses, his method, the water temperature, and he's very passionate about that. And there's been some other health tips over the years, things like his research on vitamin D and things like that I've found very useful from the show as well. Now, I know this show is from one of the quote-unquote big boys of the podcasting world, and it's been around for about 10 years, but Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte, man, they deliver the goods every week. And for me, I consume this show as soon as it's available. Often I do that live, and depending on the topic, sometimes I listen more than once. And yes, for me, the show is that good. So that's my favorite for 2015. It probably has been for a couple of years. I just didn't realize it. Security Now from the Twit Network, twit.tv/SN. Thanks for your time, Dave. Take care.
Thank you, Rich. 6 years listening because he delivers valuable stuff that he needs for his job.
Hey, Dave, Scott Johnson here, calling from the Tampa Bay area of Florida. I do 2 podcasts, and you helped me get both of them off the ground. Every Monday, I do the Computer Tutor podcast, which offers a cool tip or trick to help you use your computer. That's at computertutorflorida.com. And every Friday, I have the Ultra Finishers podcast, where I interview regular, everyday people who have actually completed an ultra marathon. And that's at ultrafinishers.com. My favorite podcast has only become my favorite probably the last 6 months or so. It's the Tim Ferriss Show, and it's at 4hourworkweek.com. That's all spelled out, /podcast. Tim Ferriss, of course, is the guy that wrote the 4-Hour Workweek several years ago. Now, I like him because he's very intelligent, and he's into a lot of intriguing things. He basically interviews top performing people from all different categories, people that are just world class in what they do. And he deconstructs their methods and processes and habits to see what other people can do and maybe have a similar degree of success. I also like the fact that he asks very well thought out questions, and he obviously does his homework before each interview. And maybe the thing I like best about his show is that it's a long-form show with very limited commercials. The commercials are only at the beginning and at the end. Like, for example, he just did an interview with Kevin Costner, and it was like 2 hours, and it was just uninterrupted. Not every show's that long, but he just doesn't worry about time constraints, like a regular radio show would have to keep track of. So thanks, Dave. Hope you have a great holiday season. Take care.
Thank you, Scott. I am a regular listener to the Computer Tutor Florida show. I love it. It's quick. Scott gets in there, gives me a cool tip, tells me how to quit having Windows 10 bug me all the time, and gets out. Check it out, computertutorflorida.com.
Hey, Dave, it's Sharon Merrill here, and I have the UU Perspective podcast all about Unitarian Universalists and what they're up to in the world and how they're out changing the world. A lot of social justice and things that are current in the world. So you can catch us at uuperspective.com, and just want to let you know that my favorite podcast is 99% Invisible. And the reason I just love that show is because it talks about all the obscure, unique things that you would never know about in the world unless you heard this podcast. I mean, things from the cow tunnels in Manhattan to the dead letter office where all that lost mail goes and what happens to it, to the over 100-year-old light bulb that's still lit. Just crazy stuff that's just amazing. And so it's my favorite podcast just because I like to know all those odd things that no one else knows about, puts new wrinkles in your brain. Pretty cool. So that's my favorite podcast, 99% Invisible.
Thank you, Sharon, another fellow Cleveland podcaster. If you're interested in that, go over to clevelandpodcasters.com. And don't forget, everything we're talking about today you can find at schoolofpodcasting.com/494.
Hey, Dave. It's Al Holtz from 2 shows. The Last Ship Podcast, found at thelastshippodcast.com, a weekly review and analysis of the TNT summer TV drama The Last Ship. And my current show is Writing Tips from Learn to Self Pub at learntoselfpub.com, which is a series of quick writing tips for aspiring authors. My favorite podcast is the Daily Tech News Show with Tom Merritt, found at dailytechnewsshow.com. I like this show for a number of reasons. First, it's daily, so there's always some new content coming. Secondly, it's consistent. Tom even does what he calls the headlines-only shows on holidays. For example, on Thanksgiving and the Friday after Thanksgiving, he had headlines-only shows. So he doesn't have a co-host, but he still wants to get the information out there to folks. Third, while the format of the show stays the same each day, they do headlines up front, then they have a discussion topic. Tom's co-hosts rotate on a daily basis, and that keeps the show very fresh. You hear a new voice every day, and it really adds a lot to the show. And then finally, the show provides some excellent technology information that I find extremely interesting, and there's no way I would discover much of this on my own. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in your show like this, and as long as you're recording, I'll be listening.
Thank you, Al. And that means pretty much I'll quit recording the day after I die is how that's going to work. Next to the last one here, and this one talks about a super niche podcast. Check this out.
Hello, this is Terry Nora from the Discovering America podcast. You can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, and at the website, which is discoveringamerica-history.com. I cover topics and events that led to the discovering of America and leave the listener with a I didn't know that feeling. The podcast I look forward to each week is the Thomas Jefferson Hour. The creator of the show, Clay Jenkinson, with his semi-permanent guest host, David Swenson, cover topics about the men and women that played a part in the creation of this great country, what life was like in that time period and in ours through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson. Clay also tries to define to the listener about becoming more Jeffersonian in a Hamiltonian world. If this doesn't make any sense to you, then you should be listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. And Dave, your program is tops. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, my friend. And the last one, of course, is what is my favorite podcast? Well, the podcast that as soon as it comes out, I jump all over it is the New Media Show with Todd Cochran and Rob Greenlee. And like our friend was talking about before with Michael Butler and Dave Schlusser, this is just a great duo because they have so much experience. You have Hall of Famer Todd Cochran and Rob, who's basically worked for anyone cool from Microsoft to Westwood One or Podcast One. Now he works for Spreaker. Their experience and their knowledge is second to none. Todd, of course, is also the CEO of Raw Voice, which owns Blueberry, which makes PowerPress, and so he's working in the advertising space. And like I said, Rob is working for Spreaker now. So it's an interesting dynamic at times because they are kind of competitors. But why I love this show is they don't have any fluff. They share things that you really cannot get anywhere else because they have such a different view than the average podcaster. And if you listen to the show enough, you can read between the lines. I mean, I figured out that Google was getting into podcasting way before it was announced because of just little hints that they supplied. And my thoughts were confirmed when I thought the New Media Expo was in trouble. I kind of heard that also on that show. Their guests are top-notch. It's an hour long, if not more, but it flies by. But my favorite part of the show is Todd Cochran's passion. He is the champion of the little guy, and he's out there every day making sure that we don't get overlooked and is trying his best to clear a path for monetization for the little guy. He's very passionate, and my favorite phrase to hear out of Todd's mouth is, I probably shouldn't say this because I know what's following is pretty much gold. Let me play you a clip.
Westwood One is doing nothing in the podcasting space. So they absolutely have no clue what they're talking about. They may be talking to people, but if they're selling advertising, they would know that there's not an issue. This is what the thing that makes me pissed off when I see stuff, when people talking out their ass about stuff that they really don't know.
I love Todd Cochran when he gets fired up. So for the information about my industry that I can't really get anyplace else, delivered in a lighthearted fashion, I love the New Media Show. Find them over at newmediashow.com. So there you have it. People's favorite podcasts and why. Everything we talked about you can find at schoolofpodcasting.com/494, including the Kindle book, which is a edited version of the transcripts of everybody that was just mentioned. So if you want to help support the show, help drive us off the Amazon charts, go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/494 and pick up the book. So as we were listening to those, I jotted down some notes, and here's some things that jumped out at me. Things people said. The dynamics between the two hosts, the brilliance of the content, of course, content is king, and its relevance to things I like. Right? Figure out what your audience wants, gives it to them, make it relevant. Really brings in inspiration. It educates me and it entertains me at the same time. I never find it boring. Excellent banter between the hosts. The storytelling is so good. The stories are a deep dive. A really engaging host who covers a wide variety of topics. Information I wouldn't know without listening to their podcast. This show has some fantastic advice. I think the man is absolutely brilliant. Shows tough love to his listeners and doesn't sugarcoat things for them. I've always learned something from every episode. They get to the point, there's not a lot of fluff. This is a show that really gets deep. I kept hearing that phrase deep over and over and over. Information that comes out is very timely and relevant to my day job. I like to know all those odd things that no one else knows about. There's no way I would discover much of this on my own. And again, it's a long-form show. A lot of different things that people are getting into. Thought it was interesting. No Serial, no Marc Maron, no really of the big shows, no This American Life. That was kind of interesting, I thought. But I do want to thank everybody who contributed to this. Again, this will be, obviously in this episode, it will also be now as a book on Amazon. And I'm going to actually turn this into a podcast. Just a weekly show. Now, you can hear them all here. There's no reason to resubscribe over there, but I am going to turn this into its own little podcast. That way, if somebody says, why should I start a podcast? I go, here, go listen to this. But I want to thank Al. I think he said his name was Chiaki. Chris, Craig, Dan, Emily, Eric, Francis, Gretchen, Harry, Jeff, Jeremy, Jessica, John, and John, as well as Judy, Ken, and Ken, including Kim, Laura, Max, Maya, Michelle, Rich, Scott, Sharon, Steve, along with Steve, and lastly, Terry. And thank you for a great year. Looking forward to bringing you what you need to hear about podcasting in the future. And have a great and safe Happy New Year. And I will see you in 2016. Don't forget, if you want to sign up for the School of Podcasting, go out, use the coupon code LISTENER. That's LISTENER. I will see you next week with another episode of the School of Podcasting's morning announcements. Until then, class is dismissed. I hope to see you on the inside. Take care, and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Power of Podcasting Network. Find it at powerofpodcasting.com. Changing the world, one download at a time.